You thought a one-night stand wouldn't have consequences.
Rebecca's warm smile didn't reach her eyes as she watched Julia arrange Tommy's toys in the living room. Daniel caught that calculating glance in the hallway mirror, the same look his wife wore when planning dinner parties or orchestrating neighborhood gossip. Something cold settled in his stomach. "She's perfect," Rebecca whispered, squeezing Daniel's arm. "Young, energetic, and she clearly adores children. Tommy already likes her." Daniel nodded, watching their 2-year-old son babble happily as Julia built block towers with him. The interview had gone smoothly. Julia Hayes was 24, recently graduated with early childhood education credentials, and desperately needed live-in work to pay off student loans. Her references were spotless. "We really need the help," Rebecca continued. "Your work schedule is so unpredictable, and I'm exhausted trying to manage everything alone." She wasn't wrong. Daniel's consulting firm demanded long hours, and Rebecca had been increasingly stressed about managing household responsibilities. A live-in nanny seemed logical, even necessary. "When can you start?" Daniel asked Julia. "Tomorrow, if that works," Julia replied, her voice bright with relief. "I can move my things in this evening." Rebecca's smile widened. "Perfect timing. Mason, he's my friend's son. He does odd jobs around the neighborhood. He can help you move your furniture." Daniel had never heard of Mason, but he nodded absently. His phone was already buzzing with work calls. That evening, Mason Price arrived with a pickup truck and easy confidence. He was maybe 26, with calloused hands and the kind of casual charm that made people trust him immediately. He helped Julia carry boxes upstairs, cracking jokes that made her laugh. "Nice place," Mason said, glancing around the kitchen afterward. "You folks hiring for any other projects? I do electrical, plumbing, general repairs. Always something breaking around here," Rebecca said quickly. "I'll make a list." Daniel shook Mason's hand, noting his firm grip and direct eye contact. The guy seemed reliable enough. "Thanks for helping Julia settle in. Send me a bill for your time." "No need," Mason said. "Just helping out a neighbor." After he left, Daniel found Rebecca in the kitchen, writing on a notepad. "Making that repair list already?" he asked. "The bathroom faucet's been dripping for months. And those loose floorboards in the hallway." She tapped her pen against her lips. "Mason seems handy and affordable." Julia appeared in the doorway holding Tommy. "Thank you both again for this opportunity." "I promise you won't regret it." Daniel smiled. "Welcome to the family, Julia." But as they headed upstairs for bed, Daniel caught Rebecca glancing back toward the front door with an expression he couldn't quite read. Over the next few days, Julia proved herself invaluable. She maintained routines, prepared healthy meals, and kept Tommy entertained with educational activities. Daniel felt guilty about how relieved he was to have professional help. Mason returned Wednesday to fix the bathroom faucet, then Friday for the loose floorboards. By the following week, he was back to install new cabinet hardware Rebecca had suddenly decided was essential. "He works fast," Daniel mentioned one evening, finding Mason's tools still scattered across the kitchen counter. "He's thorough," Rebecca corrected. "Better to do things right the first time." Daniel couldn't argue with that logic, but something nagged at him. Mason's truck seemed to be parked outside their house increasingly often, even when no obvious repairs were needed. "Julia, is Mason helping you with Tommy too?" Daniel asked the nanny one morning. Julia looked up from the breakfast dishes, confused. "Helping how?" "I don't know. I just see him around a lot. He's usually working on something for Mrs. Carter." "Yesterday he was installing new smoke detectors." Daniel frowned. Their smoke detectors were only 2 years old. But before he could ask more questions, his phone rang with a client emergency. That afternoon, he returned home early to grab forgotten files. The house was quiet, too quiet for a home with a toddler. Daniel checked the living room and found Tommy napping on the couch while Julia read nearby. "Where's Rebecca?" he asked. "In the basement with Mason. Something about the water heater making noise." Daniel headed downstairs, but stopped halfway down the steps when he heard Rebecca's laughter, light and flirtatious in a way he hadn't heard in months. "You're terrible," she was saying. "Julia will wonder what we're doing down here." "Let her wonder," Mason replied, his voice lower and more intimate than seemed appropriate for a handyman conversation. Daniel backed up the stairs quietly, his mind racing. Maybe he was reading too much into innocent banter. Rebecca could be friendly, even flirty, without meaning anything serious. But the tone bothered him. That evening at dinner, Rebecca was unusually animated, telling stories about her day and asking Daniel detailed questions about his work projects. She seemed almost performatively interested, like she was overcompensating for something. "How's the water heater?" Daniel asked casually. "Fixed. Mason said it just needed a simple adjustment." Rebecca's response was quick and smooth. "He's so knowledgeable about these old systems." Julia glanced between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. "Should I put Tommy to bed now?" "Please," Daniel said. "I'll come up to read him a story in a few minutes." After Julia disappeared upstairs with Tommy, Daniel studied his wife's face. "Rebecca, is everything okay between us?" She looked genuinely surprised. "Of course." "Why would you ask that? You just seem different lately, more distant, then suddenly very interested in my day. I can't read you." Rebecca reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm just adjusting to having Julia here. It's nice having help, but it's also weird having someone else in our space all the time. I think I'm overcompensating by trying to be extra normal." Her explanation made sense, and her touch was warm and familiar. Daniel relaxed slightly. "If you're having second thoughts about Julia, no, she's wonderful. Tommy loves her, and she's exactly what we needed. I just need time to adjust to the change." They spent the evening watching television together, Rebecca curled against his side like old times. When they went to bed, she was affectionate and present in a way she hadn't been for weeks. Daniel felt foolish for doubting her, but the next morning, he noticed Mason's truck parked across the street before 7 a.m. By the time Daniel left for work at 8:30, Mason was already inside, ostensibly checking the electrical outlets in the living room. "Preventive maintenance," Rebecca explained when Daniel questioned it. "Better safe than sorry with old wiring." Daniel's unease returned, stronger than before. Their house was only 8 years old. The electrical work was up to code and under warranty. But Rebecca seemed determined to find reasons for Mason's continued presence. Over the following days, Daniel paid closer attention. Mason's visits followed a pattern, always when Daniel was at work, always lasting several hours, always for vaguely defined maintenance projects. Rebecca grew irritated when Daniel asked specific questions about the work being done. "I don't micromanage your job," she snapped one evening. "Please don't micromanage mine. Managing household repairs isn't your job, Rebecca. It's our job, both of us. Fine, from now on, I'll run every decision past you first. Every light bulb change, every clogged drain, every squeaky hinge. Would that make you feel more in control?" Daniel backed down, not wanting to escalate the argument. But privately, he started keeping track of Mason's visits, noting times and supposed reasons. Julia began looking uncomfortable during these conversations. One evening, she approached Daniel hesitantly. "Mr. Carter, can I talk to you about something?" "Of course. What's wrong?" "It's probably nothing, but—" Julia glanced toward the stairs, making sure Rebecca wasn't listening. "Sometimes I feel like Mrs. Carter is testing me. Like she moves things and then acts surprised when I can't find them. Yesterday, she told me you wanted Tommy's schedule changed, but when I asked you about it, you had no idea what I was talking about." Daniel's attention sharpened. "What kind of things get moved?" "Tommy's favorite stuffed animal, my car keys. Yesterday, his medical forms disappeared from the kitchen counter, and Mrs. Carter found them in my room. She acted like I must have taken them by mistake, but I never even touched them. Has she said anything directly critical about your work?" "Not exactly. But she makes comments about how I'm still adjusting or learning the family's way of doing things. It makes me feel like I'm constantly disappointing her, even though you and Tommy seem happy with everything I do." Daniel felt anger building in his chest. "Julia, your work has been excellent. If Rebecca is making you feel otherwise, that's not okay. I don't want to cause problems between you two. Maybe I'm being oversensitive. You're not. And you shouldn't have to deal with this." Daniel paused, considering his words carefully. "Has Mason ever made you uncomfortable?" Julia's expression shifted. "He's friendly, maybe too friendly. Yesterday, he offered to fix my car's rattling noise, but I told him it was fine. Mrs. Carter got upset that I refused his help. She said I was being ungrateful. You don't have to accept help from anyone you're not comfortable with. I know. It's just that Mrs. Carter makes it seem like I'm being difficult when I try to maintain boundaries." Daniel thanked Julia for her honesty and sent her to bed early. Then he sat in his home office, staring at his notes about Mason's visits and connecting them with Julia's experiences. The pattern was becoming clearer, and it wasn't good. Rebecca was undermining Julia systematically while creating excuses for Mason to spend time in their house. The question was why. The next morning, Daniel decided to work from home without announcing it ahead of time. He told Rebecca he had client meetings all day, then parked his car around the corner and slipped back into the house through the basement door. Mason's truck was already parked outside. Daniel positioned himself in the upstairs hallway, where he could hear conversations from the kitchen below. Julia was giving Tommy breakfast while Mason worked on something near the sink. "You're good with him," Mason said. "Natural mom material." "Thanks," Julia replied, but her voice was guarded. "Mrs. Carter should be down soon if you need to talk to her about the project." "Actually, I wanted to ask you something. There's this place downtown. Great live music." "You like jazz?" Daniel felt his jaw clench. Mason was asking Julia out in Daniel's own kitchen while his son sat 3 feet away. "I don't really go out much," Julia said diplomatically. "This job keeps me pretty busy." "Come on, everyone needs a break. I could pick you up Saturday night." "She's not interested." Rebecca's voice cut through the kitchen, sharp with irritation. Daniel hadn't heard her come downstairs. "I was just being friendly," Mason said, but his tone suggested more than friendship. "Be friendly somewhere else. Julia has responsibilities here." There was a long pause, then Mason spoke again, quieter but still audible. "When do we tell her?" "Tell me what?" Julia asked. "Nothing," Rebecca said quickly. "Mason, can you check the upstairs bathroom faucet?" "I think it's starting to drip." Daniel heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly slipped into his bedroom, leaving the door slightly open. Mason appeared in the hallway, but instead of heading to the bathroom, he stopped at the top of the stairs and whispered something Daniel couldn't hear. Rebecca's quiet laughter floated up from below. "Not now," she whispered back. "Tonight, after Daniel's asleep." Daniel's blood turned cold. Whatever was happening between his wife and Mason, it was escalating beyond inappropriate friendship. He waited until Mason left, then confronted Rebecca directly. "What's going on with you and Mason?" Rebecca looked up from folding laundry, her expression perfectly innocent. "What do you mean?" "I mean, why is he here constantly? Why are you having whispered conversations about telling Julia something? And why did you shut down his attempt to ask her out? You were listening to private conversations?" "In my own house, yes. Answer the question, Rebecca." She sighed dramatically. "Mason has a crush on Julia, but she's not interested. I'm trying to protect her from awkward situations while still getting the work done that we need. As for telling Julia something, Mason wanted to admit his feelings to her, and I was trying to talk him out of it." The explanation sounded reasonable, but Daniel's instincts said otherwise. "Why are you protecting Julia from Mason if he's such a great handyman?" "Because she works for us, and workplace complications help no one. I'm trying to keep everyone professional and comfortable." Daniel wanted to believe her, but the pieces still didn't fit properly. "What's happening tonight that you don't want Julia to know about?" Rebecca paused in her folding. "Mason is coming over late to finish installing the security cameras. You know, the ones you asked about for the baby's room? I didn't want Julia to worry that we don't trust her. She's already insecure about her performance." That was news to Daniel. "I never asked about security cameras. You mentioned being worried about Tommy when we're both out." "I thought cameras would give you peace of mind." Daniel had no memory of such a conversation, but Rebecca seemed confident about it. Maybe he'd made an offhand comment he'd forgotten. "Where exactly are these cameras going?" "Tommy's room, obviously. The living room and kitchen for general security. And maybe the front hallway. Maybe. Mason will assess what makes the most sense. He knows security systems." Daniel wasn't sure when Mason had become an expert on security systems, but he decided not to press the issue. If Rebecca wanted cameras, fine. They might actually help him figure out what was really going on in his house. That night, Mason arrived after 10 p.m. with a bag of equipment. Daniel helped him carry it inside, then excused himself to finish work in his office. Through the window, he watched Mason move through the house with Rebecca, pointing at corners and discussing placement options. Their body language was casual but familiar. Rebecca touched Mason's arm when making points, and he stood closer to her than seemed necessary for professional consultation. Daniel felt the familiar knot of suspicion tightening in his stomach. By midnight, Mason had installed 4 small cameras, one in Tommy's room, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in the front hallway. The system connected to an app on Daniel's phone, allowing him to monitor feeds remotely. Test it tomorrow, Mason said, packing up his tools. Make sure all the angles look good. What do I owe you for this? Daniel asked. Don't worry about it. Consider it a favor between friends. After Mason left, Daniel found Rebecca cleaning up the kitchen. Everything looks good, she said. You'll feel better knowing Tommy's safe when we're not home. Daniel nodded, but privately he was already planning how to use the cameras to monitor more than just Tommy's safety. The next morning, he tested the system from his office. The feeds were clear and the audio surprisingly good. He could see Julia preparing Tommy's breakfast, hear their conversation, and observe the natural ease between them. Julia was genuinely devoted to his son. That much was obvious. Around 10 a.m., Mason arrived for another undefined project. This time, Daniel watched the kitchen feed with full attention. Mason entered through the front door without knocking, comfortable as a family member. Rebecca greeted him with coffee already prepared, and they stood close together discussing the day's agenda. Julia's taking Tommy to the park at noon, Rebecca said. That gives us 2 hours. 2 hours for what? Mason asked, but his tone suggested he already knew. To finish what we started yesterday. Daniel leaned forward, studying their expressions. Rebecca looked excited, almost giddy. Mason seemed more cautious, but willing to go along with whatever she had planned. They moved into the living room, outside the kitchen camera's range. Daniel switched to the living room feed, but the angle only showed part of the sofa and coffee table. He could hear voices, but couldn't make out words clearly. Frustrated, Daniel decided to take a long lunch break and observe the situation directly. He parked down the street and walked back through the neighbor's yard, entering his own backyard through the side gate. From the back patio, he had a clear view into the living room through sliding glass doors. Rebecca and Mason sat on the sofa, closer than friends, but not quite intimate. They were looking at something on Rebecca's laptop. Daniel crept closer, staying below the window line. Their voices became clearer. She suspects something, Rebecca was saying. Julia asked me yesterday why you're here so often. What did you tell her? That we have a lot of projects, but she's not stupid, Mason. She's starting to question things. Maybe we should back off for a while. No, Rebecca's voice was firm. We've come too far to stop now. Julia needs to go. Daniel's blood chilled. They were plotting to get rid of Julia, but why? I don't like lying to her, Mason said. She's a nice kid. She's an obstacle. Once she's gone, we won't have to be so careful. Careful about what, exactly? Rebecca closed the laptop and turned to face Mason fully. About this. About us. She leaned in and kissed him, soft and lingering. Mason didn't pull away. Daniel felt the world tilt sideways. His wife was cheating on him with the handyman, and they were planning to destroy Julia's job to cover their tracks. He backed away from the window, his mind racing. Confronting them now would accomplish nothing except alerting them to his knowledge. He needed evidence, documentation, and a plan. Back in his car, Daniel called his lawyer. I need to talk to you about divorce proceedings, he said quietly. And I might need a private investigator. What's the situation? Daniel explained what he'd witnessed, keeping his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. Don't confront them yet, his lawyer advised. Document everything you can. If there's a custody issue later, evidence of affair and plotting against childcare will work in your favor. What about Julia? They're planning to ruin her job to cover their tracks. Can you warn her without alerting your wife? Maybe, if I'm careful. That evening, Daniel acted normally. He played with Tommy, ate dinner with his family, and made small talk about work. Rebecca was cheerful and affectionate, asking about his day and sharing neighborhood gossip. She was a better actress than he'd realized. After Tommy's bedtime, Daniel found Julia in the kitchen cleaning up. Can we talk privately? He asked. Julia looked nervous. Did I do something wrong? Just the opposite. But I need to ask you to be very careful around Rebecca for the next few days. Don't be alone with her if possible, and document any criticism or strange requests she makes. Is something wrong? I can't explain everything yet, but trust me when I say your job is secure regardless of what Rebecca might tell you. If she tries to fire you or make you quit, call me immediately. Julia nodded slowly. Should I be worried about Mason too? Yes, avoid being alone with him as well. Mr. Carter, are you and Mrs. Carter getting divorced? The question was direct and perceptive. Daniel considered how to answer. Possibly, but that has nothing to do with your job performance or your place in this house. You've been wonderful with Tommy, and I won't let anyone change that. Julia's eyes filled with tears. I was so afraid I was doing something wrong. Mrs. Carter has been making me feel like I'm constantly messing up. You're not. She's manipulating you for reasons that have nothing to do with your work. The next few days were tense and strange. Rebecca continued her campaign of subtle undermining against Julia, moving items and questioning decisions that had previously been fine. But Julia, now aware of the game, began documenting each incident in a notebook. Mason's visits became less frequent but more pointed. He lingered in doorways watching Julia work, made comments about her appearance, and asked personal questions that made her uncomfortable. He's trying to find something to criticize, Julia told Daniel one evening. Yesterday he said I was teaching Tommy bad habits by letting him play with building blocks in the living room. But you specifically bought those blocks for him to use anywhere in the house. Daniel felt his anger building toward both Mason and Rebecca. Their plot was becoming more aggressive and desperate. On Thursday evening, Daniel worked late at the office to give Rebecca and Mason privacy for whatever they had planned. Then he parked down the street and used his phone to monitor the camera feeds. At 9 p.m., Mason arrived. Instead of his usual tools, he carried a bottle of wine and takeout food. Rebecca met him at the door wearing a dress Daniel hadn't seen in months. They settled in the living room with dinner and wine, talking and laughing like a couple on a date. The camera angle showed them clearly, and Daniel recorded everything on his phone. Around 10 p.m., Rebecca moved closer to Mason on the sofa. They kissed again, longer and more passionately than before. Mason's hands wandered, and Rebecca didn't stop him. Daniel had seen enough. He drove home, entered through the basement, and walked loudly up the stairs, as if he'd just arrived. By the time he reached the living room, Rebecca and Mason were sitting on opposite ends of the sofa, the wine and food cleared away. Hey, honey, Rebecca called brightly. Mason was just fixing that loose outlet cover. All done now, right? All done, Mason agreed, standing up quickly. I should head home. Daniel shook Mason's hand, noting the nervous sweat on his palm. Thanks for taking care of that. Send me a bill. No need. Happy to help? After Mason left, Rebecca was unusually chatty about her day, filling silence with meaningless conversation. Daniel played along, asking questions and feigning interest while mentally cataloging her lies. That night in bed, Rebecca was affectionate and initiated closeness for the first time in weeks. Daniel went through the motions, but felt sick knowing she'd been kissing another man hours earlier. The next morning, Daniel called his lawyer again. I have video evidence of the affair now. What's my next step? Keep documenting, but start preparing for separation. Do you have somewhere safe to stay with your son if things escalate? My brother lives across town. But I don't want to leave the house until I have to. Understood. Just be ready to move quickly if the situation becomes hostile. Daniel spent the weekend watching Rebecca perform the role of loving wife while texting constantly on her phone. She claimed the messages were from her sister, but Daniel doubted it. Sunday evening, Julia approached him again. Mrs. Carter told me you're unhappy with my work, she said quietly. She said you think I'm too casual with Tommy and not following proper educational guidelines. Daniel felt rage flash through him. That's completely false. Rebecca is lying to you. Why would she do that? Because she wants you to quit, and she's trying to make you think the decision came from me. Julia looked confused and hurt. But why would she want me to quit? I thought everything was going well. It is going well. This has nothing to do with your performance and everything to do with problems between Rebecca and me. The divorce you mentioned? Yes, and Julia. If Rebecca fires you or forces you to quit, I'll write you the best reference letter you've ever seen, and I'll help you find a new position. Don't let her destroy your confidence or your career over adult problems that have nothing to do with you. Monday morning, Daniel decided to work from home again without warning Rebecca. He waited until she left for her weekly grocery shopping, then called Julia downstairs. I need to show you something, but it's going to be upsetting. He pulled up the camera footage from Thursday night on his laptop, the wine, the intimate dinner, the passionate kissing. Julia watched in silence, her face growing pale. Mrs. Carter and Mason, she said finally. Yes. They're having an affair, and they want you gone so they can be more open about it. But why blame you for being unhappy with my work? Because if you quit thinking I wanted you gone, you might not realize what was really happening. It protects their secret. Julia sank into a kitchen chair. I feel so stupid. All those times Mason offered to help me with things or asked me out, I thought he was just being friendly. You're not stupid. You were being manipulated by two people who don't care who gets hurt as long as they get what they want. What happens now? Now we document everything and wait for the right moment to expose them. Are you willing to help me? Julia's expression hardened. They tried to destroy my career and my self-confidence to cover up their affair. Yes, I'll help you. Over the next week, Daniel and Julia gathered evidence systematically. Julia documented every instance of Rebecca's gaslighting and undermining behavior. Daniel recorded conversations and compiled video footage of Rebecca and Mason's intimate moments. They discovered Mason had been installing cameras in odd locations around the house, not for security, but to monitor Daniel's schedule and avoid being caught together. There's one in the hallway outside your office, Julia reported, and another one near the garage door, so they know when you come and go. Daniel felt violated and furious. His own home had been turned into a surveillance system to facilitate his wife's affair. On Wednesday, Rebecca announced she was going out of town for the weekend to visit her sister. I need a break from everything, she said. Just some girl time to clear my head. Daniel didn't believe her for a second. More likely, she and Mason were planning a romantic getaway. Thursday evening, he called Rebecca's sister directly. Oh, Daniel, how are you? Rebecca said you might call. I'm so sorry I can't visit this weekend. I've got this terrible flu. But maybe next month? Rebecca had lied about the sister visit, confirming Daniel's suspicions about her real plans. Friday morning, Rebecca packed a suitcase and kissed Daniel goodbye with convincing emotion. I'll miss you both, she said, hugging Tommy. Take care of Daddy while I'm gone, okay? An hour after she left, Mason's truck pulled into the driveway. Instead of his usual work clothes, he wore nice jeans and a button-down shirt. He carried a duffel bag and what looked like restaurant takeout. Daniel watched from his office window as Mason let himself into the house with his own key. The betrayal cut deep. Rebecca had given another man access to their home without Daniel's knowledge. But this was also an opportunity. With Rebecca gone and Mason comfortable in the house, Daniel could gather more evidence and confront them both when Rebecca returned. He called his brother. Can Tommy and I stay with you for a few days? I'll explain everything later. Of course. Everything okay? It will be soon. Daniel packed bags for himself and Tommy, then spoke privately with Julia. I'm taking Tommy to stay with his uncle for the weekend. When Rebecca gets back, I'm going to confront them both. Do you want to be here for that? Julia considered. Yes, they tried to destroy my reputation. I want them to know I know. It might get ugly. I can handle it. Sunday evening, Daniel returned home with Tommy. Mason's truck was gone, but the house showed signs of recent occupation. Empty wine glasses in the kitchen, rumpled throw pillows on the living room sofa, an unfamiliar cologne scent in the hallway. Rebecca arrived an hour later, cheerful and relaxed. How are the boys? She asked, kissing Daniel hello. Did you miss me? Terribly, Daniel lied. How was your sister? Better. The flu passed quickly, thank goodness. We had a really good talk about life and priorities. Daniel nodded, marveling at her ability to lie so smoothly. I am glad you feel refreshed. That night, Rebecca was passionate and attentive in bed, as if her time away had rekindled her interest in their marriage. Daniel knew it was guilt and manipulation, but he played along, gathering his courage for what came next. Monday morning, Daniel took the day off work. He sent Julia out with Tommy to the Children's Museum, giving them money for lunch and activities to keep them away until late afternoon. Then he called Rebecca into the living room. We need to talk. Something in his tone made Rebecca's cheerful expression falter. About what? Daniel turned on the television and connected his laptop. The first video began playing, Rebecca and Mason having their intimate dinner the week before. Rebecca's face went white. Daniel, I can explain. Can you explain this? He clicked to the next video showing them kissing passionately on the sofa. It's not what it looks like. What about this? Another video showed Mason entering the house with his key while Rebecca was supposedly visiting her sister. Rebecca sat down heavily, her composure cracking. How long have you known? Long enough. Long enough to document everything. Long enough to know you've been gaslighting Julia to make her quit so you could have more privacy for your affair. Julia doesn't matter. Julia matters to me. She's excellent at her job, and you tried to destroy her confidence and reputation to cover your cheating. Rebecca's expression shifted from guilt to anger. You've been spying on me in my own home? In our home? Using cameras your boyfriend installed? Mason isn't my boyfriend. It's complicated. It's simple infidelity, Rebecca. Don't dress it up as something more sophisticated. They stared at each other across the living room, years of marriage dissolving into mutual contempt. What do you want? Rebecca asked finally. A divorce. Full custody of Tommy. And you're going to leave Julia alone. You can't have full custody. I can when I have evidence of your affair and your attempts to sabotage our son's caregiver. Any judge will see you prioritized your relationship with Mason over Tommy's stability. Rebecca's face twisted with rage. You self-righteous fool. You think you're so perfect, working all the time, never paying attention to what I need. What you needed was therapy or honest conversation, not an affair with the handyman. Mason understands me. He listens to me, treats me like I matter. Mason is using you, Rebecca. He's a 26-year-old handyman sleeping with a married woman for money and convenience. You think that's love? Before Rebecca could respond, the front door opened. Mason walked in carrying coffee and pastries, clearly expecting to find Rebecca alone. He stopped short when he saw Daniel. I should go, Mason said quickly. No, Daniel said. Stay. Let's all have an honest conversation. Mason glanced at Rebecca, who looked trapped and furious. Rebecca? He knows everything, she said flatly. Mason set down the coffee and pastries, his casual confidence evaporating. Look, Daniel, this wasn't supposed to happen. What wasn't supposed to happen? The affair or getting caught? The affair! Rebecca and I, it just developed naturally. We didn't plan it, but you planned to get rid of Julia to hide it better. Mason looked confused. Get rid of Julia? Why would we do that? Daniel felt a moment of uncertainty. Mason seemed genuinely puzzled by the accusation. Rebecca stepped in quickly. He's been recording us, Mason. He has videos of our private moments. You recorded us? Mason's voice rose with anger. In your own house? In my house, watching my wife cheat with another man, yes. The three of them stood in tense silence, each waiting for someone else to make the next move. Finally, Rebecca spoke. Fine, you win, Daniel. I'll give you your divorce, but I want half of everything, and I want regular visitation with Tommy. You'll get what's legally required, nothing more. And visitation will be supervised until I'm sure you can prioritize Tommy's needs over your personal drama. That's not fair. Neither is infidelity. Mason cleared his throat. Maybe I should leave you two to work this out. Actually, Daniel said, I'd like to ask you something, Mason. Did you know Rebecca was trying to force Julia to quit her job? Mason looked genuinely confused again. What are you talking about? Rebecca's been gaslighting Julia for weeks, moving her things, giving her conflicting instructions, making her feel incompetent, trying to force her to quit so you two could have more privacy. Mason turned to Rebecca with dawning understanding. Is that true? Rebecca's silence was answer enough. Jesus, Rebecca, that's cruel. Julia's a nice kid. Why would you mess with her job? Because she was in the way, Rebecca snapped. Always around, always watching. I couldn't relax with her hovering all the time. So you tried to destroy her self-confidence and make her think she was failing at her job? Mason's voice was filled with disgust. That's seriously messed up. Daniel felt a moment of unexpected kinship with Mason. At least the man had some moral boundaries. I did what I had to do, Rebecca said defensively. No, Mason said firmly. You did what was convenient for you, regardless of who got hurt. Just like this whole affair, Rebecca stared at him in shock. You're taking his side now? I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm saying that manipulating an innocent person to cover our mistakes was wrong, and I wish I'd known you were doing it. Our mistakes? Rebecca's voice was shrill. This whole thing was your idea. Now, Daniel was confused. What was Mason's idea? Mason looked uncomfortable. Rebecca asked me to install extra cameras to keep an eye on things while you were at work. She said she was worried about security. Security from what? Break-ins. She said there had been some incidents in the neighborhood. Daniel looked at Rebecca, who had gone pale again. What incidents? There were some car break-ins down the street 2 months ago. And that made you want cameras in our living room and kitchen? Rebecca's lies were unraveling fast. Mason was looking at her with growing suspicion. "Rebecca," Mason said slowly, "why did you really want those cameras installed?" Rebecca looked trapped, her eyes darting between Daniel and Mason. "For security, I told you that." "No," Daniel said, understanding flooding through him. "You wanted cameras so you could monitor my schedule. Know when I was coming home, when it was safe to be together?" Mason's face darkened. "You used me to spy on your husband?" "I used you to protect us," Rebecca shot back. "So we wouldn't get caught? By installing surveillance in his own house without his knowledge?" Mason shook his head in disgust. "That's not protection. That's violation." Daniel felt a surge of respect for Mason's reaction, even as he hated the man for sleeping with his wife. "You're both overreacting," Rebecca said, but her voice lacked conviction. "People have security cameras in their homes all the time. Not to monitor their spouse's movements for an affair," Daniel said coldly. The front door opened again, and Julia entered with Tommy. She stopped short when she saw the three adults facing off in the living room, tension thick in the air. "Should I take Tommy upstairs?" she asked quietly. "Please," Daniel said. "We'll be done soon." Julia scooped up Tommy and headed for the stairs, but not before Daniel saw the understanding in her eyes. She knew exactly what was happening. After they disappeared upstairs, Mason turned back to Rebecca. "I'm done with this." "What do you mean, done?" "I mean, I'm not going to be part of whatever games you're playing. This whole thing has gotten too complicated and too cruel." Rebecca's composure finally cracked completely. "You can't just walk away." "We had plans." "What plans?" Daniel asked. Mason and Rebecca stared at each other, some silent communication passing between them. "Tell him," Mason said finally. "Tell him what you really wanted." Rebecca's face was flushed with anger and desperation. "Fine. I wanted you gone, Daniel. I wanted Mason and me to be together, and I wanted you out of the picture." "Out of the picture how?" "Divorced. Discredited." "However it took." Daniel felt cold settle in his bones. "And Tommy? I'm his mother. I would have gotten custody." "With Mason as his stepfather." Rebecca lifted her chin defiantly. "Mason would have been a better father figure than you ever were." Mason stepped back as if she'd slapped him. "Rebecca, I never agreed to any of that. I never wanted to replace Daniel or take his kid. You said you cared about me? I do care about you. But I never said I wanted to break up your family and play house with your son." Rebecca looked between them, realizing she'd overplayed her hand. "Mason, we talked about being together. We talked about having fun, about enjoying each other's company. We never talked about destroying your marriage and taking custody of your child." Daniel watched this exchange with grim fascination. Rebecca had built elaborate fantasies around what was apparently just a casual affair for Mason. "So what was this to you?" Rebecca demanded. "Just sex?" Mason had the grace to look ashamed. "It started as just attraction. Then it became more complicated. But I never meant for it to go this far." "How far did you mean for it to go?" Mason struggled for words. "I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly. You're married, you have a kid." "I knew it couldn't be permanent." Rebecca's face crumpled. "You led me on." "We led each other on," Mason corrected. "And we hurt innocent people doing it." Daniel had heard enough. "This conversation is over." "Rebecca, you have 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. We'll work out custody arrangements through lawyers." 2 weeks? That's not enough time. It's generous, considering the circumstances. Rebecca turned to Mason desperately. "I'll stay with you until I find my own place." Mason looked uncomfortable. "Rebecca, I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not? We love each other, do we? Or did we just convince ourselves we did to justify what we were doing?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rebecca stared at Mason, waiting for him to declare his love and commit to their future together. Instead, Mason picked up his coffee and pastries. "I think I should go. You two need to work out your marriage issues without me complicating things." "You can't just leave," Rebecca said frantically. "We're in this together." "No, we're not. You made choices about your marriage and your family. I made choices about getting involved with a married woman, but those are separate choices with separate consequences." Mason looked at Daniel. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry about all of it. Your wife, your home, the camera, none of it was right." Daniel nodded stiffly. He appreciated the apology, even if it didn't undo the damage. After Mason left, Rebecca collapsed onto the sofa, crying angry tears. "This is all your fault," she sobbed. If you'd been a better husband, if you paid attention to me, none of this would have happened. Daniel felt exhausted suddenly. Rebecca, I'm not perfect. But infidelity wasn't the solution to whatever problems we had. Honest conversation was, I tried to talk to you. You were always working, always distracted. Then you should have demanded my attention or suggested marriage counseling. You shouldn't have started an affair and plotted to drive away our son's caregiver. Rebecca wiped her eyes, smearing mascara down her cheeks. What happens now? Now you find a lawyer, and we divide our assets. You get supervised visitation with Tommy until you prove you can put his needs first. Supervised by who? Someone court-appointed. Or Julia, if she's willing. Rebecca's expression turned venomous. You're not keeping that little witch around. Watch your language when you're talking about Tommy's caregiver. And yes, Julia stays as long as she wants to stay. She'll turn Tommy against me. Tommy is 2 years old. He doesn't understand adult relationships, but if you're worried about his loyalty, maybe focus on being a better mother instead of blaming the nanny. Rebecca stood up abruptly. I'm going to pack some things. I'll stay at a hotel tonight. That's probably best. She paused at the bottom of the stairs. You'll regret this, Daniel. When you're working late every night and trying to manage a toddler in a household by yourself, you'll remember what you lost. I'll remember what I lost when I trusted you, but I won't regret ending this marriage. Rebecca went upstairs to pack, and Daniel sat alone in the living room, processing everything that had happened. His marriage was over, his trust was shattered, but at least the lies were finally in the open. Julie appeared in the doorway carrying Tommy. Is it safe to come down now? Yes, it's over. Julia set Tommy down to play with his toys, then sat across from Daniel. Are you okay? I will be. Are you okay? I know the past few weeks have been difficult. I'm relieved, actually. I was starting to think I was losing my mind with all the gaslighting. I'm sorry I didn't stop it sooner. I should have trusted my instincts and confronted Rebecca weeks ago. You were trying to save your marriage. That's understandable. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Tommy build towers with his blocks. Normal life continuing despite the adult chaos around it. Julia, I meant what I said about your job. If you want to stay, you're welcome here as long as you need. Thank you. I'd like to stay if you think it's appropriate for a single father to have a live-in nanny. It's appropriate if it's what's best for Tommy. And you're excellent with him. What about Mrs. Carter's visitation? That's going to be supervised and limited until she proves she can prioritize Tommy's well-being over her personal drama. Julia nodded thoughtfully. She's going to blame me for the divorce. Probably. But her marriage failed because of her choices, not because of anything you did or didn't do. That evening, after Rebecca had left for her hotel with 2 suitcases and a lot of dramatic sighing, Daniel ordered pizza and opened a bottle of wine. He, Julia, and Tommy had a quiet dinner together, like a family recovering from a crisis. What happens next? Julia asked after Tommy was in bed. Lawyers, paperwork, custody agreements. It'll take a few months to finalize everything. And Mason? I don't think we'll see much of Mason. He seemed pretty done with the whole situation. Daniel was right. Mason didn't return to the house, and his handyman business suddenly became very busy with projects across town. Word spread quickly in their small neighborhood about the affair and divorce, and Mason found himself unwelcome in most local homes. Rebecca, meanwhile, discovered that hotel living was expensive and lonely. She called Daniel repeatedly, alternating between apologies and accusations, begging for reconciliation and threatening legal battles. I made a mistake, she sobbed during one late-night call. We can go to counseling, work through this. Rebecca, you didn't make a mistake. You made a series of deliberate choices over several months. You chose to have an affair, chose to gaslight Julia, chose to install surveillance cameras to monitor my movements. Those weren't mistakes. They were calculated decisions. I was unhappy. Then you should have talked to me about being unhappy. Or asked for a trial separation, or suggested counseling. You had a dozen better options than infidelity. Please, Daniel, I love you. I love Tommy. You loved the security and lifestyle our marriage provided. But you don't love us enough to be honest with us or put our needs ahead of your desires. The calls became less frequent as Rebecca realized Daniel wouldn't be swayed by tears or manipulation. 2 months later, the divorce was finalized. Daniel got primary custody of Tommy, the house, and most of the assets. Rebecca got supervised visitation every other weekend and spousal support for 2 years. At the final court hearing, Rebecca made one last attempt at manipulation. Your Honor, my husband has turned my own child against me and is keeping him with an inappropriate caregiver. Mrs. Carter, the judge interrupted, the court has reviewed extensive evidence of your extramarital affair and your attempts to sabotage your son's childcare arrangements. Your husband has demonstrated consistent prioritization of your child's stability and well-being. The custody arrangement stands as written. Rebecca left the courthouse alone, defeated and bitter. That evening, Daniel found Julia reading to Tommy in the living room, the same room where Rebecca and Mason had conducted their affair just months earlier. The space felt different now, cleaner somehow, free of secrets and deception. How do you feel? Julia asked after Tommy was asleep. Free, Daniel said honestly. Sad about what our marriage became, but free from the lies and manipulation. Do you regret fighting for custody? Not for a second. Tommy needs stability and honesty. Rebecca proves she can't provide either. Julia smiled. He's lucky to have you as a father. We're both lucky to have you here. You could have quit during all that drama, found a family without all the complications. I considered it, but I love this job and I wasn't going to let Mrs. Carter drive me away from something good. They settled into a comfortable routine over the following months. Daniel focused on work and single parenthood. Julia provided excellent childcare and household management, and Tommy thrived with consistent, loving attention from both adults. Rebecca's supervised visits were sporadic and often canceled. When she did show up, she was usually late, distracted, and more interested in complaining about her living situation than engaging with Tommy. She treats visitation like an obligation instead of an opportunity, Julia observed after one particularly difficult handoff. She's more interested in being right than being a mother, Daniel agreed. Tommy deserves better. 6 months after the divorce, Daniel heard through neighborhood gossip that Rebecca and Mason had reconnected briefly, but their relationship had imploded spectacularly when Mason discovered Rebecca had been telling people he'd pursued her aggressively and broken up her marriage. She was trying to rewrite history, their mutual friend reported, making herself the sufferer and Mason the hunter. When he found out, he was furious. Daniel felt a moment of sympathy for Mason. Rebecca's need to control narratives and manipulate perceptions hadn't ended with their divorce. A year later, Daniel was pushing Tommy on the playground swings when he spotted Mason across the park, working on some equipment maintenance. They made eye contact briefly, and Mason approached hesitantly. Daniel, how are you? Good. You? Better. I wanted to apologize again for everything that happened. I know my apology doesn't fix anything, but I am genuinely sorry. Daniel studied Mason's face, seeing real remorse there. I appreciate that. How are things with your business? Rebuilding. It's been tough, but I'm learning from my mistakes. And Rebecca? Mason's expression darkened. Haven't spoken to her in months. Turns out she was telling people I seduced her and destroyed her marriage. Made me out to be some kind of hunter. That sounds like Rebecca. She has trouble taking responsibility for her choices. Yeah, I learned that the hard way. Mason glanced at Tommy, who was giggling on the swings. He looks happy. He is. Kids are resilient when they have stability. You're a good father, Daniel. I'm sorry I complicated your family life. We all make mistakes, Mason. The important thing is learning from them. They parted cordially, two men who'd been on opposite sides of a destructive situation but had both grown from the experience. That evening, Julia helped Tommy build an elaborate fort out of couch cushions, while Daniel watched from the kitchen, feeling grateful for the peace and honesty that now filled his home. Daddy, come see, Tommy called, proud of his architectural achievement. Daniel joined them in the living room, crawling into the fort and marveling at Tommy's engineering skills. This was what family should feel like. Easy, joyful, built on truth instead of secrets. Later, after Tommy was asleep, Daniel and Julia sat on the back patio with wine and comfortable silence. Do you ever regret staying? Daniel asked. Never. This feels like home now. Good, because I can't imagine managing all this without you. Julia smiled. You'd figure it out. You're stronger than you think. Maybe. But I'm glad I don't have to find out. They sat watching stars appear in the darkening sky, two people who'd survived someone else's betrayal and built something better from the wreckage. 2 years later, Daniel heard that Rebecca had moved to another state, chasing a new relationship, and a fresh start where her reputation hadn't been damaged by divorce drama. Her visits with Tommy had dwindled to nothing, and she rarely called. "Do you think he'll ask about her when he's older?" Julia wondered one evening. "Probably, and I'll tell him the truth in age-appropriate ways. That sometimes adults make choices that hurt their families, but that doesn't mean he wasn't loved. Will you tell him about Mason and the affair? When he's old enough to understand adult relationships and their complications. But I'll focus on the lessons about honesty, integrity, taking responsibility for your choices." Julia nodded approvingly. "He's lucky you're thinking about this stuff now. I want him to grow up understanding that love requires honesty and respect. That you don't betray the people you claim to care about." On Tommy's 5th birthday, they threw a party in the backyard with neighborhood kids and their families. Daniel watched his son laugh and play, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about his happiness. Julia had decorated beautifully, organized games, and made sure every child felt included. She'd become more than a nanny. She was family, in every way that mattered. As the party wound down, Daniel found himself reflecting on how much had changed since Rebecca's betrayal. The initial pain and anger had faded, replaced by gratitude for the authentic life they'd built together. "Penny for your thoughts," Julia said, joining him on the patio as the last guests left. "Just thinking about how much better this is. Real happiness instead of performed happiness. No more walking on eggshells or wondering what's really going on behind the scenes. Exactly. What you see is what you get. No hidden agendas or secret relationships." Julia raised her wine glass. "To honest living." "To honest living," Daniel echoed, clinking his glass against hers. That night, after Tommy was asleep and the party cleanup was finished, Daniel realized he hadn't thought about Rebecca or Mason in months. Their betrayal had become just part of his history, not a wound that continued to hurt. He'd learned to trust his instincts, to value transparency, and to prioritize the people who consistently showed up with honesty and care. The painful lessons of his marriage had made him a better father and a better man. Julia had grown too, from a young woman trying to please everyone to someone confident in her worth and unwilling to accept manipulation or disrespect. The gaslighting experience had taught her to trust her perceptions and demand better treatment. "Do you think they're happy?" Julia asked one evening, referring to Rebecca and Mason. "I hope they learned something from the experience. But their happiness isn't my responsibility anymore. Do you think they regret what they did?" "Rebecca regrets getting caught. I'm not sure she regrets the actual choices. Mason seems to genuinely regret the whole thing. He was young and made bad decisions. She was a grown woman with a family who chose to blow it up for an affair." Daniel nodded. "That's the difference between a mistake and a pattern of deception." 6 years after the divorce, Daniel received a letter from Rebecca's lawyer. She wanted to terminate her parental rights completely, saying she was starting a new family and wanted to close the chapter on her previous life. Daniel felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for Tommy, who would grow up knowing his biological mother had chosen to abandon him. Relief that Rebecca's sporadic and disruptive presence would no longer unsettle their peaceful life. "Are you going to fight it?" Julia asked when he told her about the letter. "No, if she doesn't want to be Tommy's mother, I'm not going to force her. He deserves people in his life who choose to be there." "What will you tell him?" "That sometimes people aren't capable of being the parents their children need, but that doesn't reflect on the child's worth or value." The legal proceedings were quick and quiet. Rebecca signed away her rights without drama, apparently eager to erase all traces of her first marriage and family. Tommy, now 7, took the news with the resilience Daniel had come to expect from him. "So Julia is my only mom now?" he asked. "Julia isn't legally your mom, but she's definitely your family. She's chosen to love and care for you every day for years. That's better than a mom who doesn't want to be a mom anymore." Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought. His son understood what Rebecca never had, that family is built through daily choices, not just biological connections. That evening, Julia helped Tommy with homework while Daniel prepared dinner, their routine comfortable and natural after years of practice. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly as Julia passed him on her way to the kitchen. "For what?" "For staying. For choosing us, again and again, Julia smiled. You make it easy to choose. Daniel realized she was right. They'd built something easy and honest, free from the complexity and deception that had poisoned his marriage to Rebecca. Love shouldn't require constant vigilance and interpretation. It should feel like coming home. Years passed peacefully. Tommy excelled in school, made good friends, and grew into a confident, honest child who'd learned to value transparency and kindness. Julia pursued additional education and eventually became a certified child development specialist, making their arrangement more official while maintaining the family dynamics they all cherished. Daniel's business thrived, built on the same principles of honesty and reliability that governed his personal life. He dated occasionally but never seriously, content with the family he'd built with Julia and Tommy. On Tommy's 10th birthday, Julia surprised them both with a photo album she'd been compiling, pictures from their daily life over the years, documenting birthdays, holidays, school events, and quiet moments. It was a visual record of genuine happiness, free from pretense or performance. Look how happy we all look, Tommy said, flipping through pages of authentic smiles and relaxed moments. That's because we are happy, Daniel said simply. Because we don't lie to each other, Tommy added, even when the truth is hard. Daniel and Julia exchanged glances over Tommy's head. Their child had internalized the most important lesson from their complicated beginning, that real love requires real honesty. The last photo in the album was from that morning, the three of them, making breakfast together, flower in their hair and laughter on their faces. It perfectly captured what they built together, a family based on choice, commitment, and truth. As Daniel looked at that final picture, he felt profound gratitude for Rebecca's betrayal. Without it, he never would have learned to recognize authentic love, never would have appreciated the difference between performed happiness and genuine contentment. Rebecca had given him the greatest gift possible, though she'd never intended it. She'd freed him from a life built on lies and opened the door to something real. To honest living, he murmured, echoing the toast he and Julia had shared years earlier. Always, Julia agreed, understanding without explanation. Tommy looked up from the photo album. What are you talking about? Just appreciating what we have, Daniel said, ruffling his son's hair. We have everything we need, Tommy said matter-of-factly, returning to his pictures. And they did. Not everything they'd once wanted, not the life Daniel had planned with Rebecca, but something better, a life built on truth, choice, and daily recommitment to each other's well-being. Daniel had learned that the best revenge against betrayal isn't anger or retaliation, but building something so authentically good that the betrayer's absence becomes a blessing rather than a loss. Rebecca and Mason had destroyed their own credibility and happiness through their deception. Daniel had responded by creating transparency and genuine connection. In the end, truth had proven more powerful than lies, and honest love had triumphed over manipulation and betrayal.